Hey there, my name is Megan and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a spoiler-free review for From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. But before we go ahead and get on into the review, if you are not already subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button, as well as the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I post new bookish content. I post new videos every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday, and sometimes other days throughout the week. Also, don't forget to check down in the description box below for links to all of my social medias, my Buddy Read Discord, and my Patreon. From Blood and Ash is an adult fantasy romance, and this is the first book I've ever read by this author. I know that she has some young adult books, some young adult fantasy and sci-fi series that are published. In this world, we follow a kingdom named Macedonia, and Macedonia is ruled by these beings called the Ascended. And our main character is Penelope, who goes by Poppy, and she is the chosen one, and she is known as the Maiden. She was blessed by the gods. The kind of future of the kingdom rests on her shoulders upon her ascension and being given over to the gods. And the Maiden, despite her elevated status and the fact that everyone reveres her, really has no rights. She's not allowed to socialize or talk to anybody. No one is supposed to look at her. She's not allowed to read any books. She has to go to these daily lessons with this priestess where all she really learns about is the history of her kingdom and what's expected of her upon her ascension. So Penelope really has a miserable life. And at the beginning of the book, we are not really explained what it means to ascend, to be given over to the gods. So it is talked about how she is nearing her ascension, but as the reader, we have no clue what that entails and what that means. However, that is further or better explained towards the end of the book. Now, the kingdom of Macedonia seems to be relatively at peace, but there was this war of two kings many years ago, and there is this false prince that is rumored to still be alive and claiming his rights to the kingdom of Macedonia. And there are people that support this dark one, this false prince. They're known as dissenters, and there is a little bit of unrest with these, I guess, groups of dissenters within Macedonia. So what sets this story in motion is that the Dark One is after Poppy for whatever reason, makes an attempt on her life. So the Duke and Duchess decide to send Poppy off to the capital, which is overseen by the Queen, where she will be more guarded and protected. So there are a couple other fantasy / paranormal elements that come into the world. The first one is that Poppy has a certain magical gift that involves emotions. She is able to feel other people's emotions, and she is able to project her emotions onto people. So for example, she uses it a lot to alleviate grief and pain in people. And as the story goes on, her gift starts to evolve. So she's able to experience and project different emotions other than just calmness and ease. We also have different paranormal beings in this series. So for example, we have the gods that aren't really introduced to us directly. They are just alluded to in this book. And then we also see wolvens, which are like werewolf type characters. And then there is this kingdom called Atlantia, and Atlanteans are basically immortal beings. And if you want me to put it in perspective for you, they're basically like vampires. So I did not realize that this world had vampires. They're not called necessarily vampires, but they are vampires. And that all plays into a lot of this plot as you get to the second half of the book. Now I'm going to talk about the two main characters, which is basically Poppy and Hawk. And there were other characters, but they just didn't play that much of an essential role in the entire book for me to even really discuss them. So like I said, Poppy is the Maiden, and she is almost 19 years old. She is a character that has been basically brainwashed and sequestered away from society for her entire life. So she doesn't have hardly any life experience other than when she sneaks out of the castle to do what she wants, which she does. And she has also been taught how to fight by one of her other guards, Victor, who kind of is like a father figure towards her. So despite the restrictions that are placed on her, Poppy still has like this desire to have all the things that other people don't and be able to go out and have fun and experience life, which is something that is essentially kept from her being who she is. And then we have Hawk. Hawk is the love interest in this book. And Hawk is kind of hard to talk about because he is a character that is a catalyst for much of the change that goes on in this book. So it's hard to discuss him without revealing spoilers. So the only thing I can really tell you about him is that he has motivations for all of his actions. So there were just like conflicting elements with his personality, which kind of makes sense because he's almost embodying two different roles. And I will say that Jennifer L. Armentrout definitely wrote this character in a way to make me, at times, absolutely hate him. Like, I really did. And it is no spoiler that these characters do have romantic interactions and do develop a romantic relationship. For this review, I do want to talk about the things that I dislike first and then kind of go into the things that I like, because I feel like it would make more sense if I did it this way. And the first thing really isn't something that I didn't like per se, but I'm just putting it in this category because I feel like a lot of people who go into this might find it as a negative. But basically, this book read very, very young adult to me. And the only difference between this and a YA fantasy or any other YA fantasy I've read is that there were more graphic sex scenes and a little bit more mature vocabulary in those sex scenes. The fact that this book read like a young adult book really didn't bother me because I like young adult fantasy, but the difference is that the world is not very complex, the magic system is not very complex, the themes are not nearly as intricate and mature as themes in adult books, and not even the fact that our characters are in their late teens. Like, I mean, Mistborn, Vin is 16 years old, but it's not focusing on like what a 16-year-old is going through. The themes are just so much more mature and complex. So this book is just lacking that. And then having said that, is a lot of this book, like the twists and turns and reveals and all the things that were supposed to be like a surprise to the reader, for me personally was not a surprise at all. I personally found this book to be extremely predictable, and I feel like anybody who has read young adult fantasy or a decent amount of young adult fantasy would be able to see these twists and turns from like a mile away. And they were heavily foreshadowed, like obvious foreshadowing. And then another thing that I couldn't really reconcile is that there is abuse in this book. So Poppy experiences like physical abuse from the Duke, who was supposed to watch over her and protect her. And it just didn't make sense to me. Everyone says like the future of the kingdom is resting on you and your ascension, maiden. But yet the Duke and a couple of other people in this book physically abuse her, like beat her. And it just didn't make sense to me why someone would do that to someone that's supposed to be their savior. And the last thing, there is something about the sex scenes or the sexual encounters that I wasn't a huge fan of, but I'm gonna save that because I need to explain first what I did like. So what I did like about this book is I felt like the author wrote the romance part of this book and the angst very well. I also felt like she took time to allow the characters to spend time together, to get to know each other, and it wasn't really kind of insta-love because they actually did spend a lot of time together and they talked. I did feel like Poppy admitted to herself that she was in love with Hawk way too early, because she does like admit that she's in love with him, and I'm like, girl, you've not known him that long, come on. But like establishing like the early strong feelings you get when you meet someone new was believable for Poppy. So this is where I'm kind of going to transition into things that I didn't like about the romance part of this book. And that is, yes, she wrote these sex scenes very, very well, but I found them to be a bit unrealistic if you were someone in like this character's actual situation. So you got to think about like the age group that this book is targeted to. It's probably like girls in their upper teens, stuff like that. And the author did what she was supposed to do, and she did it well. She wrote fiction, she wrote fantasy, and it's just one of those things where you need to be careful who's reading it, because you got to remember that this is fiction and that those experiences might not be the same for everybody, and an experience like that might be completely different for you than as what the author's portraying in her book. So I feel like if you are an impressionable age group, or if you're like a parent and you have a teenager who's reading this book, like that is a good time to have that conversation about unrealistic expectations, because the author wrote Poppy's like first and second sexual encounters as being, you know, the most amazing thing ever. And that's not always the case. So I just feel like you have to go in knowing that this is completely from the author's head and cannot be like a standard in which to set your expectations. It was an easy book to read, and I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars, and I'm still on the fence if I'm going to continue the series. I'm leaning towards yes, just because it was fun, but it's not really something that I'm prioritizing right now. There are a lot of other series that I'd rather read first. Anyway, you guys, let me know in the comments if you have read From Blood and Ash and what you thought of it, and I will see y'all in another video soon. Goodbye!